three affirmations, which says to me that the system implodes under the weight of contradiction. And I gave some examples. After it was over, he walked up to me and he said, you know, you've done the greatest disservice to this worldview I've ever heard any man ever do. And he said, and I'm very, very upset with you. Obviously, you don't understand Eastern logic. I said, you know, sir, I can use a lot of Eastern logic that'll make you quite puzzled right now, but let's not do that. I said, I'm not here to impress your students. I really don't care about that. I said, I want to talk to you and you talk to me. Let's go out and have lunch. You buy the lunch, we'll get together and we'll sit down and we'll chat. He said, can I bring the professor of psychology with me? I said, are we going to be subjects or objects for him? He said, no, he's a friend of mine. I said, all right, bring him. I said, but I'm not going to talk to him. I'm going to talk to you. Just you and I, and he can listen if he wants to. So the three of us went out for lunch. He was very gracious, took out all the placemats from the table. The moment the man does that, you know you're going to get a long speech. The psychologist and I had finished our lunch. This man hadn't even begun his. It was getting congealed before his eyes, and all of the placemats were used up. And he was trying to convey one thing, the laws of logic. And he said this. He said, you know, the law of non-contradiction, where two mutually exclusive affirmations cannot be true at the same time, in the same sense, and so on. He went on to describe it. He said, that's a Western way of thinking. I said, no, it's not. He said, yes, it is. I said, no, it's not. He said, yes, it is. I said, I'm telling you it's not. He said, I'm telling you it is. I said, okay, continue. He said, then you've got the dialectical system of logic, not the either or, but the both and. Not either this or that, but both this and that. He said Marx uses it in his dialectic. You don't get either the employer or the employee. You put them together, they get a classless society. Hegel's, which was popularized by Fichte, the popularization of the thesis, spawning its antithesis, coming together for the synthesis. That's the dialectical system, all right? And he said, the Easterners use the dialectical system. That's an Eastern way of thinking. I said, no, it's not. He said, yes, it is. I said, no, it isn't. He said, yes, it is. He said, I'm telling you it is. I said, okay, get to your point. He said, the Western way, either this or that. The Eastern way, both this and that. When you were studying these Eastern worldviews, your problem is you were studying it as a Westerner, finding the either-or contradiction, and therefore finding them flawed. You should have used the both-and logic, and the contradictions wouldn't have bothered you. So I looked at him. I said, are you finished? He said, yes. He picked up his knife and fork. I said, I have one question. Are you telling me that when I'm studying the pantheistic system, I either use the both-and logic or nothing else? Is that right? I either use the both-and, the dialectical, or nothing else. Is that right? He put his knife and fork down. I said, sir, I have some news for you. Even in India, we look both ways before we cross the street. It's either the bus or me, not both of us. The psychologist said, I think it's time to go now. We're done here. But you know what he said? What he said amazed me. When I finished that little response, you know what he said to me? The either or does seem to emerge, doesn't it? Of course it emerges. The moment you open your mouth to contradict the law of non-contradiction, you're actually affirming it. Now, what did he mean by Eastern and Western? What he meant is half right. In the Western popularization of pantheism, yes, they lived that way, but it was not so with their founders. Shankara was a firm believer in the law of non-contradiction. So was Gautama Buddha. So was Muhammad. All of them firmly submitted to the law of non-contradiction, that two opposite affirmations, mutually exclusive, cannot both be true in an absolute sense, unqualified. What happens when pluralization has had its full day? What happens is you live with irrationality. The death of shame can come with secularization. The death of reason can come with pluralization. G.K. Chesterton put this powerfully in his book, Orthodoxy. The new rebel who wants to rebel against everything and a moral law is a skeptic and will not trust anything. He has no loyalty, therefore he can never be a true revolutionist. And the fact that he doubts everything gets in his way when he wants to denounce anything. For all denunciation implies a moral doctrine of some kind. And the modern revolutionist doubts not only the institution he denounces, but the doctrine by which he denounces it. So he writes one book complaining that imperial oppression insults the purity of women. Then he writes another book, a novel, in which he insults it himself. He curses the Sultan because Christian girls lose their virginity, then curses Mrs. Grundy because they keep it. As a politician, he cries out that war is a waste of life, then as a philosopher, that life itself is a waste of time. A Russian pessimist will denounce a policeman for killing a peasant, then prove by the highest philosophical principles that the peasant ought to have killed himself. A man denounces marriage as a lie, then denounces aristocratic profligates for treating it as a lie. The man of this school goes first to a political meeting where he complains that savages are treated as if they were beasts. Then he takes his hat and umbrella and goes on to a scientific meeting where he proves that they practically are beasts. In short, the modern revolutionist, being an infinite skeptic, is always engaged in undermining his own minds. In his book on politics, he attacks men for trampling on morality. In his book on ethics, he attacks morality for trampling on men. Therefore, the modern person in revolt has become practically useless for all purposes of revolt. By rebelling against everything, he's lost his right to rebel against anything. Pretty powerful stuff. Pluralization is a good thing culturally, but if it is extrapolated into meaning, relativism, then I think you've got a problem trying to delve into the deepest issues that could potentially divide us and bring a lot of hurt deep within. Secularization risks the loss of shame. Pluralization risks the loss of reason. And finally, privatization, where what happens at the end of the day then is that a person with a transcendent perspective is told to amputate his or her faith. Take your faith into the private world, and what you want to believe privately, you can believe. Don't bring it out into the public arena. If you wish to coexist with those of other views, take your belief on the deepest questions of life, purpose, and destiny, and keep it in the private world. How does one live that way? How does one live that way? You know, my own personal spiritual journey is a deep struggle of the soul, very deep. If you had met me in my teenage years, you would have considered me the last person to ever be up here talking about these things, or the last person up here to even believe these things. But it was on a bed of suicide when I was 17 years old, when I had no meaning, because my life was fragmented, completely fragmented. You learn the hard way that both pleasure and pain can ultimately leave you empty if you don't have a transcending reason to be able to face either of those. And it was on that bed of suicide for the first time I ever even had a Bible on my lap. And I say on my lap because I couldn't hold it. I was dehydrated with the poison in my system. And the reality of that experience, with opening the word that was left there, I couldn't open it. My mother was told to open it. And with her struggle with English and the King James language, really didn't make for fun reading. But I understood the heart of what was going on there. The heart of what was going on there. Fast forward. 2 years ago, the British Broadcasting Corporation ran a year-round survey on what's the greatest problem facing humanity. Every year, it was either poverty or environment, one or two switching positions. Poverty, environment, poverty. Year on end. 2010, for the first time, they got a different answer. They released it in December of 2010. You know what the greatest problem the world sees it's facing right now? Corruption. Corruption. The world says it no longer trusts its leaders. It no longer trusts those in authority because they see what is destroying the human condition is the condition of the human heart. Poverty and environment relegated to 2 and 3. That what struggles you and I face in our moral choices, the exploitation of the poor, the exploitation of people in so many different arenas of life, and all of the power brokering that goes on, as Malcolm Muggeridge used to say, the lie stuck like a fishbone in the throat of the microphone, he said. He said, wherever 2 or 3 are gathered together for authority, he said, it's truth that has died, not God. And it was in my teenage years, for the first time, I got a glimpse of my own culture, systemically corrupt, my own heart, systemically corrupt. And then the one thing I find through the process and the admission of my own heart and the listening to the voice of Christ in the Word saying, because I live, you also shall live, where I'm allowed to be freely speaking on it in the land of my birth, now in a land whose very framework was made possible by a transcendent notion, very foreign to the land of my birth. Now where I'm told, keep your faith private. Quite shocking. Quite shocking. You know, growing up in India, which is 80% Hindu, at university or in high school, 99% of the speakers were Hindu. I don't ever remember going to talk to a principal or a professor and saying, why are you doing this? It was the flow of the culture. You learned that transcendent notion of the worldview, you accepted. 10% of India is Muslim. India was only 2.8% Christian at that time. Now they say anywhere between 4 to 10%. Cultures have priorities of transcendent commitments that frame them. And you learn to accept it. It is a dangerous move in America today to tell those of faith and transcendent commitments, keep it in your private room. Don't bring it out into public. That amputation is ultimately very deadly. No, I'm not talking about a theocracy. That's not what we want. That'd be the worst option to go to. That's not what I'm talking about. But I'm saying in the arena and the public discourse of ideas, every notion that claims legitimacy to the truth ought to be given a voice at the table to discuss and defend. But this amputation that takes place at the end of the day will lead to a breakdown of meaning. I want to close with a couple of very important ideas here. You know, the search for meaning is the most critical search that any human being has. Boris Becker, after winning his 3rd Wimbledon, said the greatest challenge he was facing was that of suicide. Think of one of the greatest voices you and I would have ever heard, of Whitney Houston. What a magnificent voice. And as her coffin was being wheeled, and the mother walking behind it saying, my baby, my baby, my baby. A woman who, for whatever reason, got messed up by those controlling her life, feeding things into the system that will ultimately destroy her. No sensitive human being could have seen those closing moments of that funeral and hearing her voice ringing through the rafters, I will always love you. See, what a tragedy. But you know what? Success, fame, degrees, power, wealth don't bring you meaning. They become means to express your meaning. They never bring you meaning in and of itself. The unity and diversity of your life, that which unites the diversity of the proclivities of your life, that's the one that will ultimately bring meaning and coherence. You see, there are 2 thoughts with which I want to end after quoting this for you. I began by saying culture is an effort to find a coherent set of answers to the existential questions that confront all of us in our lives. And a cultural revolution takes place when you made a decisive break from the shared meanings of the past, particularly ones of purpose and essence and destiny. Daniel Yankelevich ended that brilliant article in Atlantic Monthly with this. He said, we surveyed people in America, watching the road down which they are going. And amongst those we surveyed was a couple called Abby and Mark. And he ends with these words. If you feel it is imperative to fill all your needs And if these needs are contradictory or in conflict with those of others or simply unfillable, then frustration inevitably follows. To Abby and to Mark as well, self-fulfillment meant having a career and marriage and children and sexual freedom and autonomy and being liberal and having money and choosing nonconformity and insisting on social justice and enjoying city life and country living and simplicity and graciousness and reading and good friends and on and on. But the individual is not truly fulfilled by becoming ever more autonomous. Indeed, it seems that to move to this far in this direction is to risk psychosis, the ultimate form of autonomy. And then he ends with these words, maybe the injunction that to find oneself, one must lose oneself, contains a truth any seeker of self-fulfillment needs to grasp. To find oneself, one must lose oneself, contains a truth any seeker of self-fulfillment needs to grasp. Now, how does this work in society? Here's a churchman, a religiously minded man who says this, and then I'll go to an atheist, what he says, and then I will close. Arthur Peacock is director of the Ian Ramsey Center for Interdisciplinary Study of Religion in Relation to Science, and he's a member of the Faculty of Theology at Oxford University and former dean of Clare College, Cambridge, at the time of this writing. Here's what he says. To be truly evangelical and Catholic, the church of the next millennium will need to have a theology that will necessarily have to be genuinely liberal and even radical, particularly in its relationship everywhere shaped by the sciences. For Christian theology to have any viability, it may well have to be stripped down to a newly conceived list of essentials, minimalist in its affirmations. Only then will it attain that degree of verisimilitude with respect to ultimate realities which science has to natural ones, and only then will it command respect as a vehicle of public truth. Here's a professor of theology at Oxford at that time saying, look, if this is what religionists want, then the only way we can let them into the arena is they strip themselves of all essential affirmations and go to a minimalist belief in what they claim. Arthur Peacock. Matthew Paris is an atheist with a lifestyle to back it. He wrote in a powerful article in a leading Indian English newspaper in 2008. Please listen. He says, before Christmas, I returned to Malawi, the country of my birth, after 45 years. It was a country I knew as a boy. It was called Nyasaland. Today it is Malawi. And the Times Christmas appeal here in London included a small British charity working there. Pump Aid helps rural communities to install a single pump, letting people keep their village wells sealed and clean. I decided to go and see this work. It inspired me, renewed my flagging faith in development charities. But traveling in Malawi refreshed another belief too, one I've been trying to banish all my life. It blatantly confounds my ideological beliefs and stubbornly refuses to fit my worldview, and has embarrassed my growing belief that there is no God. Now, as a confirmed atheist, I've become convinced of the enormous contribution that Christian evangelism makes in Africa, sharply distinct from the secular NGOs. Education and training alone there will not do. In Africa, Christianity changes people's hearts. It brings a transformation. The rebirth is real. The change is good. There's long been a fashion among our Western academic sociologists for placing tribal value systems within a ring fence beyond critiques founded in, quote, theirs, and therefore best for them, authentically and intrinsically worthy as ours. I simply don't follow this anymore. I observe that the tribal belief is no more peaceable than ours, and it suppresses individuality. People think collectively. This feeds into the big man and gangster politics of the African city today. The exaggerated respect for the swaggering leader and the literal inability to understand the whole idea of a loyal opposition. Anxiety, fear of spirits, of nature and the wild strikes deep into the whole structure of rural African thought. A great weight grinds down their spirit. But Christianity, with its teaching of a direct personal two-way link between the individual and God, unmediated by the collective and unsubordinate to any other human being, smashes straight through the philosophical spiritual framework I've just described. Those who want Africa to walk tall amid 21st century global competition must not kid themselves that providing the material means or even the know-how that accompanies what we call development will end up making the change. No, a whole belief system first must be supplanted. And I'm afraid it has to be supplanted by another. Removing Christian evangelism from the African equation may leave the continent at the mercy of a malign fusion of Nike, the witch doctor, the mobile phone, and the machete. The theologian Arthur Peacock, the atheist Matthew Paris. I'm with Matthew Paris on this one. Thank you.
The RZIM Church Leaders Conference is going to address the most timely challenges Christianity is facing. You can attend here in person, or you can register to watch by live stream on rzim.org. We have an incredible lineup of speakers, including Ravi Zacharias, Louis Giglio, John Lennox, Crawford Loritz, Michael Ramsden, Abdu Murray, Sam Alberry, and Joe Vitale. So please join us from October 3rd to the 5th. I hope to see you soon.
People are interested in having a spiritual life, but treat faith more like an a la carte menu at a restaurant, choosing what they like and dismissing the rest. Cutting through the hype and seduction is the clear voice of author and apologist Ravi Zacharias in his book, Why Jesus? Rediscovering His Truth in an Age of Mass-Marketed Spirituality. Ravi answers the attraction known as the New Spirituality. Billy Graham calls Why Jesus a powerful defense of how Jesus Christ brings meaning and hope to an individual life. And Charles Swindoll says, I'm not acquainted with a brighter mind or a more relevant and devoted defender of the faith than Ravi Zacharias. Why Jesus is available in bookstores now or online at rzim.org.
The purpose of RZIM is to engage meaningfully with the questions and heartfelt issues of our culture. We do that in areas of business, academia, politics, the arts, and media. We live in an age of confusion, and people from every continent are beginning to wonder whether there are any answers to life's biggest questions. And RZIM consists of over 50 speakers and adjuncts operating in over 20 countries, working at every level to reach those who shape the culture of a country and its future direction with the gospel. In addition to taking the gospel to various arenas of influence, we are also committed to providing a variety of training events in order to meet people where they are and to answer their questions directly. Whether it's engaging young adults and students through Reboot, Remind, and Big Deal questions, or the training we offer through the OCCA, RZIM Academy, and the New Zacharias Institute. Our purpose is not only to increase people's knowledge, but to address the obstacles that stop people from seeing the credibility and beauty of the gospel of Jesus Christ. You've been watching Let My People Think with Dr. Ravi Zacharias. We're grateful for your prayers and financial support.